on today's StoryBeat.
I always tell young artists to make sure that they have all the computer skills that they can possibly get, that they learn Photoshop, that they learn Illustrator, that they become great photographers and understand images and how they're put together. And you're going to need so many different kinds of images along the way. So that helps in documenting art and preparing art and figuring out what you're going to do in a space. You know, all of my graphic design skills have saved me. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have those skills. I mean, I started off my career designing websites and learned coding. And while I don't use that anymore, it helps me to be able to understand what's happening with the materials that I put together to either accompany my work or to help my clients understand how my work is going to look in different spaces.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the noted Connecticut artist Amy Genser, has been creating mixed media artwork for more than 20 years. She opened her studio after receiving her MFA in graphic design from the Rhode Island School of Design, where one class in paper making changed the arc of her career. Amy uses paper, paint, and other materials to explore her fascination and obsession with texture, pattern, and color. The natural world is a clear source for Amy's work. She's fascinated by the flow of water, the shape of beehives, and the organic irregularity of plants, flowers, rock formations, barnacles, moss, and seaweed. Her pieces bring to mind aerial landscape views, satellite imagery, and biological cellular processes. Amy's work can be found in hospitals, corporate offices, private collections, and museums worldwide. Her latest project was developing a site-specific installation for the Fuller Craft Museum in Brockton, Massachusetts. She had a vision of her work coming to life beyond the walls and becoming sculptural. Her multiple award-winning installation, Shifting, is a result of her exploration. I've seen a great deal of Amy's work and can tell you it's astonishing to look at, brimming with a vibrant kinetic energy and always breathtakingly beautiful. Be sure to check it out at amygenser.com. In the interest of full disclosure, Amy and I are related through the marriage of cousins. We've known one another for more years than either of us will admit, so for me, this is an extraordinarily great joy to have my friend and relative, the tremendously gifted artist Amy Genser, as my guest on StoryBeat today. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm thrilled to be here tonight speaking to you.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have you. Really, truly is. So let's go back in time just a little bit to where this all began. How old were you when you started to have an abiding interest in creating art?
As long as I can remember. I really don't remember a time when I wasn't making things by hand, just building with toys as a kid. And I always really got into the process of making things. I always loved it. I liked to do things with my hand. You know, I was that crazy kid who was always weaving the pot. Remember those pot holders that you would weave them on the little loom? I mean, I would just do those over and over again when I was young. And I was always like making those friendship bracelets and beading. And I was always making stuff.
So your mom, Vicky, is a fairly good maker of jewelry. She does all kinds of beautiful things. How important was the influence of her being a maker, a creator? How important was that to you?
You know, I can't imagine anything else. I just grew up watching her. I'm sure that it had, probably is the biggest influence because I saw that not only as something that you do every day or almost every day, but also that you could do as a career. So my mom also would take me to different galleries and museums growing up, and I never really liked those that much. I always just would rather make stuff than look at stuff usually. But I do also remember going to visit some of her friends' studios and thinking that that was really cool.
Did you know back then that you were going to do this for your whole life? Did you have a sense of it?
Nope, not at all. Yeah, I never thought I would be a fine artist.
It was just fun for you.
Yeah, it was just something I never really even thought about. It was just what I did.
Have you lost that sense of fun, or is it still fun for you today?
It's still fun. Yeah, I love it.
That's really cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think of being an artist as a kind of a calling? It's something that you were called to do?
Calling, I don't really know like what that means. Like,
is it something that was so deeply in your soul, you had to do it? There was no choice.
Well, I think in terms of creating, yes, that for some reason I have this energy that has to come out through my hands. In terms of feeling that I need to share that or that I have to do this as a career, no, definitely didn't. But I do know that I have to make things.
Well, that's clearly obvious because you've made a lot of things, a lot of big, beautiful things. So that's when you were in school as a kid, in grade school and high school and so on, you were still making things, you were creating art. And was there some point there where you thought, you know what, I need to take this to the next level. I need to go to a higher level of school for it.
I thought about it, but like I said, I couldn't imagine living life as a fine artist. I just, watching my mom struggle and seeing the uncertainty and unpredictability of that kind of a career was a little scary to me. It was very important for me to always be able to be on my own, to support myself, and to just, I'm kind of an ambitious person and really wanted to achieve in my field. And I didn't know if I could do that. I also never felt that I really had anything to say as a fine artist. I never knew what to make. Like if you gave me an assignment, I could slay it, right? I would always take art classes and do really well. But when it came to, all right, go get my sketchbook and work on my own or build something on my own, I never knew what to make. If I was building something, I would, whether it was with when I was a kid as blocks or building sculptures with wood, that was fine as long as it was, I guess, abstract. But if I had to do something that came from an idea or a concept, a lot of times it was tough if it was self-generated. On the other hand, I eventually worked as a graphic designer, and that was perfect because it was literally being given an assignment and then you would have to visually translate it.
So you're a task-oriented person. When you're given a task, you go do the task.
Yep.
Would you say you've become more self-driven over time, or is it still task-oriented for you?
A little of both.
A little of both.
I would say both. Yeah.
So if you didn't have a commission or an assignment, or you didn't have something that was on your plate, would you then think, I've got to go do something anyway?
At this point, yes.
At this point, yes. So it's become part of your heart and soul, totally.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
So you had this epiphany when you were at the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD as people call it. When you had this epiphany, what was going on? You were in a paper making class. Describe what happened.
It was like going back to being a kid when I was just making things by hand without worrying about what message I was conveying. I could just focus in on the process and then let the product develop from the process, just give into that, kind of like get my cerebral self out of it and just go.
I think that's really important for art and artists, that you hear repeatedly through varying interviews I've done and through reading, that artists who are successful tend to just let the work keep coming through them.
Yeah.
Is that the way it is for you?
Yeah, when I'm really into it, definitely. Especially now, even when I don't have an assignment, I find myself getting cranky when I haven't worked in a while because it quiets my mind. It's really, people talk about the flow, or that my mind is quiet and I can really just be with the work, and kind of like a little mental vacation, very relaxing.
Well, that's a neat thing when that happens, because then you can get into what I call the zone. When I'm working on my own art, which is writing, I can get into a zone and time just stops.
I feel so bad if people don't have that. Like if you're describing it and they don't know what you're talking about, I feel so bad for them. Like I can't imagine, right? Like it must be so exhausting.
It is exhausting because they're probably doing things they don't want to do. So that is exhausting. There's no doubt about that. So what was it at RISD that you learned that you're still using to this day? What were the fundamentals that really have stuck with you?
My degree's in graphic design. And I had originally gone to get my master's so that I could be a design professor. Working in the corporate world wasn't such a great fit for me. And I thought, all right, so I'll go into academia. I always like working with students and critiques, and thought that that could be fun. Always liked being in art school. So, but while I was there, like I said, I was really got into the form of what I was doing much more than the messaging. It really was that one professor of mine, Jan Baker, her classes that kind of I was able to springboard from. She taught not only the papermaking class, but a bookmaking class in the book arts. And I loved that, being able to manipulate the forms of the books with the story I was telling. And it was just a much more handmade approach than doing logos or corporate identity systems or annual reports on the computer. So it reminded me of how much I loved that, because I really hadn't done that in a long time. Because in college, I studied history and I minored in graphic design, but I hadn't really made anything in a long time. So it was coming back to that and reminding me of how much I loved that process. So I'm so grateful that I took that class, that I had that experience, and that I had the support of my family, and was brave enough myself to be able to do it and to try it.
Well, sure. And it is very important and really wonderful that your family did support you, because
Yes.
it's an insecure profession that you've gone into, and you might have gone into it and had no success at all, or at least no success for a long time. And that's a very big challenge. And a lot of families might have dissuaded you, said, why don't you become a teacher? Why don't you do that? Because that's more steady and stable. But you needed to do what you needed to do. So who are the artists that have influenced you aside from Jan Baker? Who else have you looked to over time and thought, yeah, this is what I really admire and wish to sort of follow in those footsteps?
Sure. A lot of women textile fiber artists. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Olga de Amaral. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that, but she's from South America, and she just weaves these amazing, beautiful forms, wall hangings mostly, and sculptures, and uses a lot of gold colors. Just beautiful, just visually breathtaking. I like the work of Magdalena Abakanowicz, who's a sculptor as well as a fiber artist, or was. She's passed away, but her work too, very monumental in scale.
As is a lot of yours.
Yes. I really love the sense of an overpowering kind of presence of the work. And for my work too, is a lot about the micro versus the macro. So working with a very tiny module of paper that I do, these paper pieces I work with, I can really pack a punch by creating a large piece. And you see all these teeny tiny pieces that create the whole.
Well, there's no question that I know when I'm in a room with your artwork, it's hard not to look at the art. It is a great presence. It has energy. The energy leaps off the wall at you. So what you're talking about is true. Do you think of yourself, I know you mentioned storytelling a moment ago. Do you think of yourself as telling stories with your art?
No, I'm not that deep, I just I always say, I see all these things. I see all these images and experience nature and the world around me. And it kind of all I take it all in through all my senses. And I always say it gets blended up in my brain, and then comes out some weird recipe in my work.
Is it emotional?
No, I don't even, not emotional. It's intuitive. So the making of it is intuitive.
It has a visceral quality to it, though. It gets you in the guts. So it must touch you as you're making it in some way.
It just soothes me. I just enjoy the process. Yeah.
All right. So what for you then makes a great image great? Why does this thing work and this one doesn't? How do you know that?
Well, you mean for it to work or not work for me? Because sometimes someone else may think it works. And
isn't that true for all art, though, that whatever you produce, it's really then becomes the viewer's art, in the sense that it's their reaction to it. It's already it's out of your hands and into theirs. But I'm saying, what then makes your work for you? Oh, this one's finished. This is great. I'm happy with it. What makes it great versus I'm not really there yet?
Purely intuitive.
Purely intuitive, just pure
Yeah.
guts.
Pure guts. If I keep looking at it, I know something's not right. It's like it feels itchy almost. Like it just kind of like
Feels
in
itchy.
my subconscious, like or on the side there. So, and I'll know I have to go back to something and rework it. For that reason, I can't live with my own work in my home. It's because it's very active and alive to me. I will constantly want to revisit it and edit and redo it. I mean, if you think about other artists, like I can't imagine a writer or really whatever someone does, if they have to have their work on the walls, what they do all day long, can you relax?
Probably not, because
Yeah.
you're always on with it.
Yes.
Do you ever go into a place where you've done an installation or in someone's home that has it, and then you think to yourself, I need to fix that?
No,
No. Once it's done and out, it's out.
done.
You
Yeah.
let it go. I think that's really good.
When I go back years later, though, and sometimes I'll see an installation or in a client's home, then I do want to rework it. But I don't live with it. So I can leave and then not be activated by my response to their work.
Well, Stephen Sondheim is a good example of a great artist. Decades after West Side Story came out, he was still tinkering with it. When they would have
Yeah.
revivals, he would ask to make changes.
Like a live document there, though, that he has, right? It is something that can be. I mean, I'd have to ask you, Steve, can I have my piece back? I'd like to rework it a little bit. I was thinking about it. And right. Yeah. It is an interesting concept, though. And I actually have done that with one piece, my neighbor's piece, and I took it back and reworked it a little bit.
Really?
Because I would see it all the time. I would go into their house and then see it. And I had to,
Were they okay with the change?
oh, yeah, they're fine. They're like, go for it. And not everybody would say that.
No, that's right. Especially
Right.
someone who wasn't your neighbor. If it was someone who admired your work, you didn't know them, they purchased your work, took it to their home, then you visited their home years later, they might object to you saying, can I have that back for a little while?
Yeah, that would probably be odd.
It would be extremely odd. How long do you think it was as you were going along before you thought to yourself, you know what, I am pretty decent at this. I'm good enough to actually put this out in the world. Was it right after school, or did it
I'll
take
let you know when I feel that.
I am the same way. I get it. You're never quite there. I think that's a good thing. It's
Yeah.
really all about the journey, isn't it? It's more about
Absolutely.
It's about the process. Yeah.
Do you think of your work as paintings, sculptures, some combination? Do you think of it in some genre form or not?
I would just say like mixed media, sculptural, dimensional, textural, colorful work. I don't really qualify it. If I do apply to a show or something, if fiber art is a medium, I'll go under that. So then it would be, I guess, technically a textile, but I don't really refer to it as a textile. It's kind of quirky in its definition of what I do because it is like a collage, but there's painting involved. And yeah, I don't know.
But because you use a lot of paper, then
Mhm.
you categorize it as fiber in some way.
Mhm.
I didn't even think of it that way till you just said it to me. I didn't think
Yeah.
of your work as being fiber based, but I guess it is.
Yeah. And paper is now, it's usually not an option for, you hear paper art. You're like, what is that? Is that a drawing? Because drawings on paper or they'll think of paper cuts. So yeah, it's kind of a visual definition. You just kind of have to see it and say, oh, okay, that's what it is.
Do you have a visual image in your head of what you're doing before you start to work?
I do usually start with an image or a little bit of a plan or an inspiration, whether it's self-generated or something that a client needs in terms of a particular palette or composition. I do usually have like a vision of it in my head or a sketch or something, but inevitably what happens is that while I'm working on the piece, it completely changes and evolves from there. I always say that it's like creating a puzzle where I don't know the final picture until I see it. And much like a painter would be mixing paints while they're working to get the right colors, I layer my paper colors on top of each other to then blend them and create my own palette So I'm making the pieces of this puzzle as I'm going along, if that makes any sense.
It does. And you're also then figuring out what the final picture will be.
Yeah.
So you don't enter into the process already knowing what the end result is supposed to look like.
Nope.
So is it frequently or always a surprise when you're there?
Well, no, I've been doing it long enough that I pretty much can build what I'm imagining or a client is imagining. I kind of do know what it looks like.
You have a pretty good clue. Once you start, you're then heading toward some kind of a finish line, even though you don't know what the exact end is going to be.
Exactly.
So,
but I can always say like, okay, I know how long this race is going to take to run by now, even if I don't know exactly what it's going to look like.
Do you usually know how long it's going to take to do a piece?
More or less, yeah, because I have to make my schedule and budget my time and, do that whole business side management of an art career.
So you like a deadline, don't you?
Well, yes and no. Depends. And I give them to myself also, because then I'm able to prioritize my work and organize it. And
I would think what you do really requires a good deal of organization because of all the many pieces and parts that go into it.
Yep.
It's not just canvas and paint and brushes. There's a whole lot more that goes into it. And so if you were disorganized, it might be really hard to do, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed. It is a very process-driven art. So there are definitely steps that I have to go up one by one.
So
it's not like it can happen all out of order.
So you actually know the order you're going to do things then?
Yes. Although it's changed over the years. I used to paint the background of a substrate before going and building my paper construction composition on top of that. Now I would put the paper pieces right down onto my substrate. I would glue it down. Now I do like a little bit of painting before I add the paper pieces, but then I rework my composition and I paint after. So that's been new. And also, since I did start working sculpturally and experimenting with different kinds of materials, building materials, I stumbled across this mesh. It's like used, you've probably seen this. It's used a lot in stage design. It's like a very thin.
It's called
mesh.
Scrim. And you
all
can
different thicknesses
and you can light one side of it and make it opaque, and you can light from behind it and make it transparent.
Maybe it's not that, but I don't think it's different if you shine light on it from either side, because you can see right through this.
You can see through it, front lit or backlit.
Yes.
I see. Okay, well, maybe it isn't Scrim, but that's what Scrim does. They use Scrim in stage shows. They paint on it and they drop it in, and it looks like a drop. And if it's front lit, you can't see through it. But when they light from behind, suddenly you're seeing into where it is. Then the Scrim goes up, and there's your scene. But it's really a common.
That's what that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I ought to try that. That could actually be really cool.
Oh, it would be really cool. Yeah.
I
absolutely.
love experimenting with new materials.
Aside from paper, what substrates do you use? What are the materials you use?
I use, depending on the project, I can put all different kinds of things in there. Sometimes I'll add metal, sometimes wood, sometimes I'll use like crushed up glass or pyrite to give it a little shimmer here and there, little surprises of something that glistens that you don't catch until you've really been studying a piece. I like to have multiple layers to my work of discovery so that it doesn't get boring.
Boring for you or the viewer?
The viewer and me too. Yeah. I always want to shake it up a little bit.
You give yourself something new to look at and deal with that gives you a challenge.
Exactly. Yep.
Let's talk about the actual pieces or how you put it together.
Yes.
When you say you glue paper onto a substrate, what are the substrates? It's not canvas, is it? Is it masonite? Is it wood? What are your substrates?
So I used to use canvas, but I wasn't really happy with its ability to really stay firm over time. So now I use, it's called PVC or Sintra. It's a sheet of basically plastic. It's the material that pipes are created from. and just flattened. So it's about 4 millimeters thick. And then I have that. I don't build these, by the way. I have a really great fabricator who does them professionally because it wouldn't come out as perfect if I made it. So then they glue and like hammer it into the wood frame. So you don't see the wood, it's just behind it. But that really keeps it hard and in place, and it's not going to bend or warp at all. So I like that to paint on as well as to build on. It's just a great material.
But it's easy for them to manipulate it, yes?
For the builder to
The
manipulate
builder,
it?
right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes in like a big sheet form. So
And
they can just...
Do they cut it somehow?
Yeah. And I cut it myself too. Sometimes I won't have it attached to a wood frame because sometimes it'll just be more of like a flatter piece that then gets framed on its own. And I'll just use the PVC sheet. I buy it from a plastic wholesaler.
A wholesaler?
Near me, a wholesaler near us. And I'll just buy sheets and then cut it down.
So you also then shape it as opposed to somebody building it for you. You also can do that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then that substrate is very accepting of glue that will then take whatever you're putting on top of it.
Yep. And lately I've been working on that mesh that I was talking about that I build the installation from, working in sculptural pieces. And that way I can move the pieces around like real puzzle pieces almost. Like I'll do a section and figure out if I want a certain color somewhere. I can kind of test it out and try it in different places. Whereas before I really kind of had to commit when I was adhering the paper modules right onto the substrate. This is a little more forgiving. I also find that it's a little more secure, the paper attaching it to this mesh. It really soaks it up and it's on there tight. I also, when I finish a piece, I layer it with multiple coats of varnish so that it protects it not only from the light, but dust. And if you touch it, it actually feels very hard. You wouldn't even know it's paper. You can see the striations in the concentric circles of my pieces in the paper. But other than that, it feels hard, almost like, ceramic or plastic.
How do you apply the varnish?
Brush.
With a brush?
A mop brush. Yep.
That must take quite some time, yeah?
Yeah, luckily, I have an amazing assistant and she's really patient with things like that. So she does a much better job than I do because I just slop it on there and she's very careful.
So prior to this more recent process and more back in the beginning, it was kind of, I'm going to use some kind of an equation here, but I'm probably wrong, that it's almost like doing watercolor where you have to layer it properly or you've ruined it because you're building it up.
Not that unforgiving because I could always take the pieces off. And I've done that many times, just taken off large sections. So it's a pain in the butt, but I could still make changes.
All right. So what kind of paper do you use? What have you used all along?
All different kinds from all over the world. I started off early in my career using papers that I made, but quickly realized that was a whole art form in its own and takes so long. And the product was so precious that I didn't want to manipulate it or take away any of its great qualities by folding it and hiding parts of it. So now I primarily use a mulberry paper from the mulberry bush. It's created from the branches of the mulberry tree and they regenerate. So I always feel better about that, using up all this paper. And primarily it's from Thailand, although a lot of papers are also from Japan or Nepal. They have that very fibrous quality to them. They're not handmade papers. These papers are machine made, but they're still very beautiful and look fibrous. So it's pretty easy for me to find what I want in terms of the texture of the paper and even color. I have all different kinds of colors of paper, but if I can't find a solution in the materials that I have, I'll use paint and just make the pieces the colors I want on my own.
And that's pretty common for you to paint on these pieces, yes?
Yeah.
But you also have raw paper where it's not. So you take paper, just for the listeners who don't know what we're talking about at the moment, you take paper and roll up I want to say pieces of it. How do you describe what you do with the paper?
Yeah, it's really hard to describe this visual thing with words, this process, but I take long sheets of paper. So figure about 12 inches wide and about 36 inches long. And I roll it up. I use a bamboo skewer, so very high tech here. I put it in like at the beginning of the paper. And what I'll do is roll one color at a time and then add on another color. So you end up getting rings of concentric colors. And then
Like looking at at a cut log where you're seeing the concentric rings, but you're getting multiple colors throughout in these striations.
Exactly. And sometimes I'll roll the papers multiple colors at one time so that they blend. Yeah. And then like a tree with a cross section, I'll cut it, and usually about like a half an inch tall the piece will be. The little circle module, picture like a little piece of log.
Have you glued the paper together so that it stays, or how do you keep it together?
When I get to the end of it, yeah, I glue the end of it so that it stays in the roll.
In the roll. Otherwise, it would just unravel, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So
and believe me, sometimes it does.
You don't put glue on the paper and roll it up in glue. It's just the end.
Yeah, just the end. Just to seal it up.
All right. And then you're able to take these, you call them modules. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. You take these little pieces that you've made, the modules, and you then lay it out and try to figure out the puzzle pieces at that point?
Yes, exactly. And I'll end up cutting the pieces apart and moving them all around until playing with the pieces until they look good together.
I'm going to assume that once you've rolled paper together, it's fairly thick. You can't just take a normal scissors and cut it, can you?
No. Well, sometimes you can if they're little tiny rolls. My rolls are all different sizes. So yeah, the baby ones, absolutely. You can use scissors, although your hand might get really sore, but I will use anything from pruning shears. I have this little setup in my studio. It's a pruning shears that I've rigged with a vise on a wood table. So I can just kind of slice away at them that way, just like a big stick, right, in the yard. Or I have a hydraulic electric paper cutter guillotine. So that is a huge long razor blade, basically, that chops through multiple layers of paper at once and allows me to expedite and streamline my process.
This is something that is mechanical that uses electricity. This is not, you're not hand driving it.
The guillotine, no.
Yes.
No, but the pruning shears, definitely handmade.
So it's not like, what I'm trying to say, it's not like a typical classroom paper cutter.
No. That wouldn't work. It would just make the paper bend. I've tried.
And it would probably, make it all gnarly on the ends as well.
Yeah, ragged. I like a clean, sharp cut.
And so these strips that you start with, do you cut them to size first, or do you always use sort of a similar size and then cut the rolls down?
You mean when I'm making the pieces, when I roll them up, I usually start with the same size. Yeah.
The same size. So you're buying stacks of the same size of paper.
No, I have to buy larger pieces of paper and then I cut it down to what works for me process wise.
Are you able to tell us what kind of glue you use? It's not white paper glue, is it? Or what do you use?
Am I able? Yes. Will I?
Well, I'm saying, is it a secret? If it is, don't tell us, but is it something you can describe or not? Is it something special? Is it proprietary?
It is not. It's actually the glue that I use to adhere the pieces is a Loctite product called Power Grab, and it's used in construction. And it's just super, super strong and acid-free, archival, and works really well.
Yeah, that's amazing. So is it kind of like super glue?
No, it's very thick.
It's thick.
It's like a paste. Yeah. Usually it comes in one of those, like a caulk almost. Usually they come in those kind of, use a caulk gun to get it out, but I buy big gallons of it and just kind of spoon it out.
And it's easy to paint on, I assume.
The glue?
Yes.
Could if I want to, but I try to make it so that you don't really see the glue.
You can't see the glue. That was my question. So you can't see the glue. Well, then you don't need to worry about that. Do you have tricks for finding your muse, so to speak? Do you take, I know you're a photographer as well. Do you take a lot of pictures as inspiration for the works you're doing?
I do. Yeah, I definitely do. And I guess it's kind of odd too that I don't always then look at the photos for my inspiration. I take them and then I just have them. And I had this experience the other night where I had taken these images of sand at the beach and all the channels that the water created and these like river-like forms almost. And I was going through my portfolio for something and was looking at the images of these pieces I made, and it really looked like those photographs, but I didn't make that on purpose. Kind of like there's a visual language that I respond to, I guess. And then I kind of like,
You absorbed it through taking the photo, and then it was
yeah.
in your psyche.
Yep.
That's really terrific. And I think it's not uncommon for artists to absorb all kinds of things and not know where the inspiration came from after a while. But your work has a similar quality to it all through. You're not doing a portraiture one day. You're not doing landscape of the desert one day. Your work has a similar quality to it all the way through. So that your inspiration for me always seems like it comes from the sea, from the ocean. It comes from more than that, doesn't it?
Definitely. Yeah. Any kind of a biological process I'm really into, like that's created out of cells, something that's flowing, things that are moving. Again, like the micro to the macro, things that have lots of teeny tiny parts. I like, yeah. Just
so you work from the photos, do you? The photos just become a memory for you.
Yeah. Sometimes I work from the photos. Like I'll have them up in my studio. I'll put up images. I will, but not like a static image that I'm trying to recreate. If you know what I mean, does that make sense? Like,
no, explain what you mean by not a static image.
Like if I'm looking at a photograph, right, and I'll call it a static image.
Okay.
If I'm trying to make something that is the composition of the photograph I have and the colors and if I try to make it, it won't look like that. If I do, it wouldn't, I don't think it would have that same energy like you mentioned, where I'm just letting the work drive itself. Otherwise, it's kind of static. It's just, there's no room to play with it, that it has to be a certain thing of the image that I saw, which is, I guess, a lot of the reason why I like abstract work too. You do not want to see my portrait or my landscape drawing because they will not be good. You know, a lot of times people say, I'm not a good artist. I can't draw. I can't draw. I mean, a little, but not great.
So you don't ever sketch your works in advance. You don't.
Sometimes I do, sometimes definitely, but it changes throughout the process. Like I said, it's, you know what, my sketches are more of a starting point, if that makes sense.
I don't know if, I'm sure it's not exactly the same, but you're making me think of Frank Gehry, the architect, where he does these sketches that are very free form and very loose. They're not at all what the ultimate architecture is going to look like, but it gives you a sense of the space and of the dimension of it.
Yeah, maybe the core feeling of that piece or building. Yes.
Yeah, but you're not literally drawing what you're ultimately going to build.
No,
because you have to find it in the process. You already said that.
Yeah, exactly.
So you create very interesting titles for your works. I find them interesting. I'm going to list a few of them: coiled terrain, intertwined, flow, confluence, Neptune, synapse, and recently shifting. How do you come up with your titles? Where does that come from?
I don't know. Just again, things in nature or scientific processes, or
did they just hit you as you're looking at the work?
Pretty much, or I think about what I'm trying to convey, or for example, the piece that you mentioned, confluence. So that piece lives in the lobby of the University of Iowa Health Center in Iowa City. And it's right, you go up an elevator and it's right there, and it's 6 feet tall by 14 feet wide.
Wow.
So it's a pretty big piece, and it's very well lit. So it's very bright, I will say. And the concept of that piece, part of it was Iowa City has, much like Pittsburgh, a bunch of rivers that meet in the city and then flow out from there.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the university, a place where ideas are exchanged, where lots of people from different backgrounds from all over the world and working in different disciplines come and collaborate. Also, it is in this medical building, but it's a teaching facility as well. So I wanted to convey the idea of this meeting place of not only biology and the water systems and the ecosystem there, but of the population and the communication as well, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So that's way deeper than I was expecting you to go, because you've been saying all along that you're just making these things, you're not really thinking them through all that deeply. But in fact, that was well thought through. That was very deep.
Yeah, I guess.
And frankly, the word confluence is one that Pittsburghers know well, because the three rivers here are always talked about as the confluence of the Monongahela, the Allegheny, to form the Ohio River. But they always use the word confluence, which is a word that you don't hear all that often.
Yeah, I think you hear them in cities where rivers come together. Yeah, or bodies of water comes together. But I love that word for exchange of ideas, all coming together to flow in a new direction.
Well, for sure, because that's exactly what it is. Yeah. You're taking different things and forming something new out of them.
Yep. You were saying, like, I do have these ideas and concepts that do go into the work, but I guess in terms of using that, well, it is definitely reflected in the composition of the piece too. And I do have that concept before I start the piece when it's a project like that, something that's going in the public domain, that does have to be a little more conceptual and thought out. And
do you prefer a commissioned piece over something that you're just coming up with on your own that you might try to sell later? Do you prefer the commission?
I need both.
You need both.
I need both.
And when you're working on a commissioned piece, are you usually responding to the wants and needs, the color choices, the design choices of a place that you're going into, or do they give you free rein?
Rarely do I get free rein, although that's when you get the best work, people. Yeah, just a side note there.
Some constraints are good.
Constraints are fine. Yes, a lot of times when I'm working with client, particularly residential clients, I'll say, all right, let me see where you want to put it. Where's the space? And we'll kind of come to a size. I'll do sketches for them so they can see what scale works the best in their space. And then I will give them the assignment of looking through my portfolio, usually just my website, and taking notes to the best of their ability to be able to describe maybe why they like a piece, what they like about it, both in terms of color, composition, texture. It could be, sometimes they just say, I don't even know. Or I once had a guy say, it just sounds like jazz to me. I hear jazz when I look at this. And I was like, really? Okay, well, cool. All right, I'll try to do that again.
I agree. It is like, your work is like jazz. It has a jazz-like feel to it. It's you take one theme and then you repetitiously alter it and change it and make something new as you're going along. I think that's a good equivalence. Explain for the listeners about this recent installation called Shifting. I've seen pictures of it. I don't even know how to describe it. Are you able to describe it?
Yeah. So it's up actually through December of this year. I put it up in February of 2022. So it's had a good run, a couple more months now. I'll be sad. I just set the date to go take it down. But what it is it's a gallery in this craft museum that is in Brockton, Massachusetts, like you said, and it's very nestled into its surroundings in the woods. It's by a big lake. It's very beautiful. It has a lot of windows. And I noticed when I was there that the seasons must play a very large role in how it feels to be in this building,
Sure.
Both in terms of the light and the colors. And I mean, I first went there in fall and the colors were dynamite, all the leaves, and the sky was beautiful. So I took that concept of the seasons in that space and made pieces that reflected the changing of the seasons. So mostly I tried to evoke feelings of trees and growth and again, the water flowing. But I was feeling really kind of stifled and bored for a few years, just felt like I was making the same thing. And while I enjoyed and loved making it, I felt like I needed to do something new, and gave myself, again, here I go with the assignment, is I was able to work with the museum on this project. And, they said, here you go. And they gave me carte blanche. They said, here's the space, do whatever you want. And so I got to work with new materials and started to incorporate that mesh. And I went through a lot of different things before landing on this product, but I then build with it. So it's coming off of the walls.
It's leaping off of the walls. It's amazing.
Yeah. So it's very coming, it comes off of the walls into the space, and it flows and it undulates. It goes on the ceiling. If I had my way, it would go on the floor, but it is a kind of heavily trafficked area, so that probably wouldn't be such a great idea. But yeah, and I even wanted to make it bigger. I mean, if you can, so here's this dream I have, is if you can imagine like Frank Serra's big pieces.
Yes.
You walk in them.
Sure.
And of my work, kind of like that, where it's this whole cave-like environment. And I can play around with the lighting to make different drama and make things to add different drama rather, and to just really be in it. I mean, this was my first time creating an environment with my work and working in that manner, in that sculptural manner. So I definitely want to keep working with that and push that a lot further.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you want to actually take your work and make it so large that people can actually move through it.
Yes.
That's very ambitious.
Yeah.
And have you thought about what you would need to do in order to structurally make a piece that large sound? In Richard Serra's case, he's using pieces of metal, so it's not going to just fall down once he's figured it out. How would you keep your piece up? Wood, metal?
I don't know yet. Yeah. See, that's something I would have to explore. And what's cool about that and exploring with the new materials is, so, okay, I'd have to play around with all those things. But while I'm playing around with those things, the work will change of what I had in mind to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Because working with new materials kind of informs the process, and then that in turn affects the product.
So the space that shifting is in, you say it has lots of windows, and the light is probably always moving around in there, yes?
Yep.
And so how important then is light in your work?
I don't necessarily always think of it strategically or purposefully in how I'm going to use light to affect my piece. That's definitely something I would love to think about and would be a lot of fun.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, even if you're not planning for the light to have an effect on your work, the light does have an effect on your work.
Without a doubt. Yeah. In terms of like the color.
And you're casting shadows in different direction, depending upon where the light's coming from. The work changes and looks different in different lighting all the time.
Absolutely.
I think that's very fascinating. That can be true with a painting too, on a two-dimensional painting, but not so much, not like your work, where it really does shift around with the different light. Do you ever think about putting it into a space that has no light in it and specifically lighting it a certain way?
No, but that would be very cool.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe you can help me with that, Steve.
I can. I have a little tiny background in that. Yes, I think that would be cool, because then you could actually change the lighting in an enclosed space and make the work look different on a regular basis. I think that'd be kind of cool to do. Do you think of your work as commercial?
How would you define that?
Well, I think of commercial art as that you're purposely making it in order to make money with it. Do you think of your work that way, or do you think of your work as it's just an outpouring of your soul, or is it both?
Both.
It's both.
Absolutely, both. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will make things that I know will not sell. And
why won't they sell? Why do you think that?
Or maybe that I'm not even trying to sell. I don't know.
They're just experimental, so they're not for sale?
Yeah. And a lot of times with things that don't finish, I just have them as side projects that I'll work on. Sometimes I'll make things to sell that I know, what will sell well in certain sizes and colors. And I mean, let's be honest, I have to make a living. And
well, exactly. So there's no shame in it. Most artists are trying to sell their work on some level. Most artists do not want to be like Van Gogh and go their entire life and only sell one painting. No, you want to make money with it.
Yeah.
But there is a difference to me between truly commercial artists versus artists who are they don't even think about selling it. They're just working.
Yeah.
I think you have a little bit of both going on there.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you do to keep sharp
In what way?
in life? How do you keep yourself sharp so that you can keep work? Do you have to work with your hands? Do you have to exercise so that you can actually do this physical labor of making the art?
Yeah, I have to keep my body healthy and strong. Definitely stretching and working out and trying to take care of myself, both in terms of not physically being able to do it all the time, but also mentally too, taking breaks. Yeah, because I know for a lot of artists, it's very easy to get wrapped up in your work, and the next thing you know, your whole day's gone by, but then your body's in pain. And
exactly.
yeah.
That's why I ask. Do you have a particular technique that you use? Is it yoga? Is it running? What technique do you use? Anything?
I walk my dogs.
You walk your dogs.
I walk my dogs. Yeah, lift a little bit of weights a couple times a week, and yeah, and then my family, I have 3 kids, as you know, and
I do.
that kind of just shuts the clock off at a certain point. Also, right? It's like an enforced deadline of the day where
Well, sure,
gotta go home.
you have to pay attention to that part of your life as well. You can't just all be art and work and work and work.
Right.
You actually have a personal life as well.
So that's how I keep sharp too.
But there are artists and writers and people in the creative industries that do ignore their life. They're just dug in on what they do. I've been there. I've done that a little bit myself. I've had to try and get away from it. But you have the family, and the family sort of forces you into that. Yeah?
Yep.
What special items do you have in the studio that you must have? Is it music? Is it food? Is there something that you need to have in the studio in order for you to continue to do your work, be inspired, and so on?
A lot of windows.
Windows.
A lot of natural light. A space that feels good. Room to move around.
So you
Pretty
need
much it.
You need a large space.
Yes.
So you wouldn't work well in a confined or smaller space.
No, I would feel claustrophobic and limited. Yeah, I need space and light.
I don't want to use the word inappropriately, but do you dance around in the studio? I don't mean dance, literally dance, but I mean, do you move around a lot?
Depending on the size of the piece, yeah. Sometimes I am moving a lot. In fact, when I was creating that piece for the installation, it was all over my studio, every single wall. And I was constantly up and down on a scaffolding thing that I had in the studio and up and down the ladder. I mean, I would be sweating just constantly. And by the end of that, my neck and my back hurt so bad. I really just had to take some time off. I was in bad shape.
And you were losing track of time while you were doing it. So the body was also losing track of itself. Yeah.
Yeah. I was all out of whack, but I had to be, I had to be up by a certain point, and it was a lot of work. It was pretty ambitious, and I just had to get it done.
What were the biggest obstacles that you had to overcome?
Just how to build this thing mechanically, how to put it together and install it, and having it all come together. I wasn't able to see it all laid out until I was finally in the museum.
Ooh.
In hindsight, I would have built in more time so that I could have gone and done that and then worked it a little bit more. But on the other hand, there is something to be said for just having a little, having a plan, but then leaving a little room for that, that unexpected.
What I'm hearing in there is there might be things that you would, as you like to tinker, there are things you probably would like to do a little differently if you could. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely.
And so has anybody ever said to you any of those things that you think need changed?
No.
So it's really your point of view, but no one else knows that it needs changed, just you.
No. Yeah.
That I think that's the sign of an actual true artist. So I have been having the most wonderful conversation with Amy Genser for close to an hour at this point, and I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences over all this time working with art and artists, do you have a story that you can share with us that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or maybe just plain funny?
I probably have one of each of those, but I've picked a few. Okay. So the first one that I got a kick out of was early on in my career. I was right out of graduate school and I made this big piece. I think it was, well, it was really big for me at that point. It was 20, I think it was like 36 by 48. And it was bought in a gallery in Boston on Newbury Street. And the client was from Australia. And shipping became so expensive that the client actually just bought a plane ticket for the piece and sat it next to him on the seat. So I always imagine that in my head. I think that was pretty funny.
I imagine, did they give it a drink?
I hope so. No, it was like all wrapped up in bubble wrap. Probably needed some air. Yeah. Let's see what else. Another kind of weird one that just kind of makes you raise your eyebrows at was I was at a hospital installing a piece, and it was a brand new facility, and there were other artists installing work at the same time. And the hospital, I can't remember if they didn't have their certificate of occupancy yet, or they had just gotten it. In any case, the architect said you need to wear closed-toed shoes and pants and, like the helmet, right?
A hard hat.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm not a word person. I'm a visual person.
It's okay.
So thank you, word person. I had on the hard hat, and I'm like a rule follower, so I am like good to go. I'm there in my jeans, my overalls, my like thick work boots. But down the hall from me was a mosaic artist who was refusing to wear, number one, closed-toed shoes. She insisted on wearing sandals, and she said, it's too hot, I need to wear shorts. So, I'm like, what? Like, seriously, lady? Like, and then the next thing I know is that we all have to leave because this woman is not following the rules and regulations of a building code that are there for your safety, lady. So we all had to leave, and then we couldn't like work for a day or something, that they then had to like get permission again to let us in. So then my project ended up having to go in high speed because then I only had 2 days to install it, whereas I really needed 4 or 5 because some lady wouldn't wear shoes.
And how did you solve that?
I had to work really quickly day and night after just sitting for a day.
Mm-hmm.
Not being allowed in the building. So that's frustrating. That was pretty frustrating.
That sounds like the theater to me, because most shows that I've worked on, and I've worked on many, there come moments where you're absolutely in trouble and you have to work super fast to make everything work because something got screwed up along the way. That's what that sounds like to me.
Yep. Yep. How do you deal with that best?
You do just exactly what you said. You just forge ahead and you do what it takes. And you know what? They always work out somehow, don't they?
I guess. Yeah.
It almost never doesn't work out. I mean,
No.
the audience is coming in whether you're ready or not.
It's true. And I always say, I do think it's funny sometimes when there are like strict art deadlines, especially with residential projects, because like who has an art emergency that like you have to have it at a certain time or else?
That is true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, that is true. Who has an art emergency? Last question for you today, Amy. You've already told us lots of great pieces of advice along the road here, but I'm just wondering, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you can lend to those that are maybe just starting out in the art business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to figure out how to make it grow or go to that next level?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a couple things. One is purely skill-based in the fact that I always tell young artists to make sure that they have all the computer skills that they can possibly get, that they learn Photoshop, that they learn Illustrator, that they become great photographers and understand images and how they're put together. And you're going to need so many different kinds of images along the way. So that helps in documenting art and preparing art and figuring out what you're going to do in a space. All of my graphic design skills have saved me. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have those skills. I mean, I started off my career designing websites and learned coding. And while I don't use that anymore, it helps me to be able to understand what's happening with the materials that I put together to either accompany my work or to help my clients understand how my work is going to look in different spaces. So that is very technical advice.
Well, you need that technical advice, don't you?
Yes, but you'd be surprised, at least when I went to art school. I mean, granted, it was like 100 years ago at this point. They didn't teach that. You just had to learn that on your own outside of class. You just had to know. So I don't know what they do now. I'm totally out of it. So that's my technical advice. In terms of other advice, I would just say to understand, I mean, and you know this, that rejection is part of it, and that it's not necessarily rejection. It's that it's not right for a certain place at a certain time. So to not take it personally that your art sucks, that the work's not good and that you shouldn't keep going. It's just, you know, like any art form, you get a lot of no's, just as many no's, probably more. You know, it's like if I think about me selecting a piece of art for my home, if I'm narrowing it down to 4, it doesn't mean I don't like the 3 that I didn't pick. So to keep that in mind, to not take it personally, and to be brave. Yeah.
I think that that's very wise advice, because the best way I think to think about those things are, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Not that I'm a fatalist, because I'm not, but yeah. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If it's somebody's going to like it and buy it. And by the way, it doesn't mean if 1,000 people look at it and reject it, it doesn't mean that the 1,001st won't fall in love with it.
Exactly.
So it is a matter of keeping at it and keeping at the work and keeping doing it, and not dwelling on what you've already done, but to move forward as you do.
Yes. And putting yourself out there so that even if it's not, if your objective is to sell the work, if it's not selling in a certain place, maybe you got to shake that up and try somewhere else, another avenue, another media, you know, just being able to be flexible with the way you're working with it, and having an open mind, talking to people, talking to all different kinds of people, no matter what they do, asking questions, to just and trial and error above all else, right? I mean,
100%.
Getting it out there.
Well, that is extremely wise advice, and I think well put. And it's important that those that are in the business of the arts, that they don't find that some rejection means your entire career is lost. You just have to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I always say that, like, the best thing that I learned in art school was basically I bought confidence, so that when most people tell you something's not great, but if one does, or you feel it's good, that, you know, keep going. So confidence.
Fantastic. Amy Genser, this has been just a marvelous and fun hour plus for me on StoryBeat, and I can't thank you enough for giving me your time and all of this wisdom and all of your energy. And, you know, I hope you just keep making great art.
Yeah, I have no choice. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I really appreciate you interviewing me. It's great to talk with you. Hope we can talk again soon. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.